My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 34. For my parents' 35th anniversary, I drove nearly 2,200 miles with a gift sealed inside a simple black box. I hadn't even taken off my jacket when my mother looked straight at me and said, "We didn't invite you. Your brother organized this." Then my father stood up, slid the box across the table like it was something dirty, and said, "We don't want anything from the son who walked away from this family." The box hit the floor. Everyone in the room went quiet. I picked it up, turned around, and walked out the front door. By the time they realized what was inside that box, what it had cost me, what it meant, and who had actually been keeping the roof over their heads for the last 4 years, they were already on the highway driving straight to my front door. But before I take you back to the beginning, if this story ends up staying with you, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now let me take you back 4 years. That night I learned my parents were about to lose their house. I grew up in a town called Ashford, Maine. Population barely over 3,200. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your parents' names, and the mistakes you made when you were 15. My father, Richard Harper, owned a small auto repair shop off Route 17. My mother, Elaine, worked mornings at the town library and afternoons helping Dad with bookkeeping. And my older brother, Lucas is 3 years older than me, was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it feel like the whole place was built just for him. Lucas was loud where I was quiet. Confident where I was careful. The kind of guy who could tell a story at the dinner table and have everyone laughing before dessert. I was the one who cleared the plates. I don't say that bitterly. It's just how things were. Dad used to joke about it at family gatherings. He'd point at Lucas and say, "That one's the future of the Harper family." Then he'd glance over at me and grin. And Daniel, well, Daniel's figuring things out. Everyone would laugh. I laughed too. The first time I remember hearing that joke, I was 9. The last time, I was 21. The wording never changed. Neither did the laughter. When I graduated college, I didn't stay in Ashford. I got a job offer in Phoenix, Arizona, a logistics company that needed someone who knew supply chain systems. It wasn't glamorous. But it was a start. The morning I left, my car was packed with 2 suitcases, a duffel bag, and a cardboard box full of books. Dad was in the garage working on an old pickup engine. I stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "I'm heading out," I said. He didn't look up. Just kept tightening a bolt with his wrench. "Drive safe," he muttered. Then after a second he added, "Phoenix is a long way just to prove a point." I didn't answer. Because I wasn't leaving to prove a point. I was leaving because staying felt like slowly disappearing. For the first year in Phoenix, I called home every Sunday evening. 7 o'clock sharp. Sometimes Mom answered. Sometimes Lucas. Dad rarely came to the phone. When he did, the conversations were short. "How's work?" "Good." "You staying busy?" "Yeah." "All right then." By the second year, the calls started going straight to voicemail more often than not. I'd leave messages anyway. "Hey Mom, just checking in." "Tell Dad I said hi." "Hope the shop's doing well." Most of the time, nobody called back. When I asked Lucas about it, he always had the same answer. "They're just busy," he'd say. "Don't read into it." I wanted to believe him. So I did. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday night in late March. I had just gotten home from work and was halfway through heating leftover pasta when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Aunt Carol. Mom's older sister. We talked maybe twice a year. I picked it up. "Hey, Aunt Carol." Her voice sounded tight. "Daniel. I wasn't sure if I should call you." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. What's going on? There was a pause. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. Your parents are 3 months behind on their mortgage. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What? The bank sent a final notice last week. How bad is it? Carol exhaled slowly. Bad enough that they could lose the house by the end of summer. I stared at the microwave clock blinking 7:42. The house she was talking about wasn't just any house. It was the one on Cedar Lane. The place where Lucas and I had grown up. Where Dad built the back porch himself. Where Mom planted the maple tree in the yard the year I turned 10. Does Lucas know? I asked. Another pause. Lucas told them he'd handle it, Carol said. But I haven't seen anything happen. My mind was already racing. How much do they owe? I'm not sure exactly. But Daniel, she said quietly. You might want to call them. That night, I didn't call. I sat at my kitchen table in Phoenix for almost 2 hours. Just thinking. Finally, around 10 o'clock, I opened my laptop and searched for the number of the bank in Ashford. Ashford Community Credit Union. After 2 transfers, I ended up speaking with a man named Mark Dalton. Branch manager. Calm voice. Professional. I explained who I was. Asked about the mortgage status on the Cedar Lane property. He hesitated at first. Then confirmed it. 3 missed payments. Foreclosure process is about to begin. But then he added something that made my chest tighten. Actually, someone called last week claiming to be a family member. What did they say? That they'd take care of the payments. And? They never followed through. I already knew who that had been. Lucas. He'd made the promise. But he hadn't paid a single dollar. I stared out the window of my apartment. The Phoenix skyline glowing orange under the streetlights. Then I said something that would quietly change the next 4 years of my life. I want to set up automatic payments, I told Mark. For the mortgage. He paused. You're sure about that? Yes. And should I list you as the primary payer on the account? No, I said immediately. I took a breath. Keep it anonymous. He hesitated. You understand your family will assume someone else is paying. That's fine, I said. Just don't tell anyone it's me. And just like that, $2,150 a month began leaving my bank account. Every single month. For a house in Maine. A house belonging to parents who barely spoke to me anymore. At the time, I thought I was just protecting the place I grew up. I didn't realize yet that someone else was about to take credit for every single payment. $2,150 a month. That was the number that quietly reshaped my life. At first, it didn't seem that dramatic. I had a steady job in Phoenix, decent pay, a small 1-bedroom apartment, and a used Honda that had already seen better years before I bought it. I figured I could manage it for a few months, maybe a year if things were tight. But months turned into years faster than I expected. Every time the first of the month rolled around, the payment left my account automatically and landed in Ashford, Maine. $2,150. Right into the mortgage on the house on Cedar Lane. I never told my parents. I never told Lucas. The only person who knew was Mark Dalton at the credit union. And he had promised to keep it that way. The first change I made was small. I stopped buying coffee on the way to work. It sounds ridiculous, but when you're trying to stretch a paycheck that suddenly has a $2,150 hole in it every month, small things matter. $5 here. $10 there. It adds up. Then came the bigger adjustments. No vacations. No new furniture. No impulsive online purchases at midnight when the day had been long and my brain wanted something shiny. My apartment slowly filled with things from thrift stores and estate sales. The dining table I ate at every night cost $6. The couch came from a second-hand shop that smelled faintly like old books and lemon cleaner. But it worked. The mortgage stayed current. The foreclosure notices stopped. And the house on Cedar Lane kept standing. About 3 months into the payments, someone else noticed the change in my life. Her name was Rachel. Rachel Kim worked in the same logistics office as I did. She was a systems analyst, sharp as a razor, with a calm voice and a habit of noticing things most people missed. We had started dating casually about 6 months after I moved to Phoenix. Nothing dramatic. Dinner after work. Weekend hikes. The occasional movie night where we both fell asleep halfway through. She was sitting on my couch one evening, laptop balanced on her knees, when she glanced over at the spreadsheet open on my screen. "Daniel," she said slowly. I looked up. "Yeah? What's this column?" I froze. The spreadsheet was my budget. Every dollar accounted for. Every payment listed. She turned the laptop slightly so I could see what she was pointing at. A column labeled Mortgage, Cedar Lane. $2,150. Every month. Rachel looked back at me. "That's not your house." I rubbed the back of my neck. "No." She studied me for a long moment. Then she closed the laptop gently and set it on the coffee table. "You're paying your parents' mortgage, aren't you?" I didn't answer. But my silence was enough. Rachel leaned back into the couch cushions. She didn't say I was crazy. She didn't ask why I would do something like that for people who barely returned my calls. She just nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. That was it. Just one word. The next weekend, she showed up at my apartment holding 2 grocery bags. "Bulk rice," she announced. "And a slow cooker." I raised an eyebrow. "You planning to start a restaurant?" "No," she said. "We're cutting your food budget." I blinked. "We?" Rachel shrugged. "You're not the only one eating here." That was Rachel. She didn't make speeches. She made plans. Within a month, my kitchen had turned into a system. Sunday afternoons meant cooking huge batches of meals that lasted all week. Chili. Rice bowls. Pasta with homemade sauce. It wasn't glamorous. But it worked. Meanwhile, back in Ashford, something else was happening. I didn't see it directly. But Aunt Carol did. Every few weeks she would call me, careful with her words. Careful not to say too much. But sometimes the truth slipped through the cracks. The first time it happened was about 8 months into the payments. Carol sounded hesitant when she brought it up. "Your brother's been spending a lot of time at your parents' house lately." "That's good," I said. "Yeah," she replied slowly. "He's very involved with their finances now." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, "your father added Lucas to the household accounts." I leaned back in my chair. "That seems fast." Carol hesitated. "He told them he was the one keeping the mortgage current." For a moment I didn't understand what she meant. Then the sentence clicked. Lucas was taking credit. For the payments. For the house. For everything. I stared at the wall in my apartment. "That's what he told them?" I asked quietly. Carol sighed. "Your father bragged about it at church last Sunday." My stomach twisted. "What did he say?" Her voice dropped slightly. He raised his coffee cup and said. She paused. "Lucas is the only one who stayed when things got hard." I closed my eyes. Carol continued carefully. "He said you left." I didn't correct them. Not then. I told myself it didn't matter. The house was safe. That was the point. Credit didn't matter. Recognition didn't matter. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But something inside me shifted that day. Just a little. Like a hairline crack forming in glass. A year passed. Then another. The payments continued. $2,150. Every single month. My bank account slowly rebuilt itself between transfers, only to drop again on the first. Rachel never complained. If anything, she doubled down on helping. When my car needed new brakes, she helped me install them in the parking lot outside my apartment. When my laptop started slowing down, she spent 2 nights repairing it instead of suggesting I buy a new one. Once, during a late dinner on the couch, she asked a question that stayed with me for weeks. "When does this end?" she said. I looked up from my bowl of rice and vegetables. "What do you mean? When do you stop paying?" I thought about it for a moment. "When the house is paid off." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's a long time." "Yeah. And then what?" I shrugged. "Then I know they're safe." She studied my face carefully. "Is that enough for you?" I didn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know. About 2 years into the payments, Aunt Carol called again. This time her voice sounded different. Sharper. "Daniel," she said. "You're not going to like this." I braced myself. "What happened?" There was a pause. "Your father gave a toast at Thanksgiving." I felt a slow knot forming in my chest. "What did he say?" Carol inhaled quietly. "He thanked Lucas for saving the family home." The words landed like stones. She continued. "He told everyone your brother stepped up when the family needed him." I stared at the dark window across the room. My reflection looked back at me. Tired. Older than I remembered. "What did Lucas say?" I asked. Carol's voice was quiet now. He smiled. "That was it. Just 2 words." He smiled. For the first time since starting the payments, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not exactly. Something heavier. Something that felt like standing outside your own house and realizing someone else had moved in. But still. The payments continued. Month after month. Year after year. The balance is slowly falling. $140,000. $120,000. $95,000. $70,000. I watched the numbers shrink like a countdown. And I kept telling myself the same thing. When the house is paid off, everything will finally be okay. I didn't know then that the real storm hadn't even started yet. By the 3rd year, the payments had become part of my life the same way rent or groceries had. They weren't a decision anymore. They were a routine. The first of every month, $2,150 left my account without ceremony and traveled nearly 2,200 miles back to Ashford, Maine. The balance kept shrinking. Slowly. Quietly. Relentlessly. Sometimes I would open the credit union portal late at night just to look at the numbers. Not because I expected anyone to thank me, but because it was the only place in the world where the truth actually existed. My name. Every payment. Every month. A record of something no one in my family even knew was happening. Back in Ashford, Lucas was becoming something of a hometown hero. I didn't see it directly, but news travels in small towns like wind through dry grass. Fast. Unavoidable. Aunt Carol remained my only window into what was happening there. She never called with gossip. That wasn't her style. But sometimes things slipped out between the lines. One evening she mentioned it almost casually. "You know your brother's been helping your dad expand the repair shop." "That's good," I said. "He's also been managing their finances now." I frowned. "Managing how?" Carol hesitated. "Well, since he's the one paying the mortgage." The words hung in the air for a second before she quickly added. "That's what everyone thinks." The first time I heard Lucas publicly taking credit for the house, it stung. The second time, it started to feel like something else. Like a story slowly rewriting itself without my permission. According to the version being told in Ashford, Lucas had stepped up when his parents needed him. Lucas had saved the family home. Lucas had kept the Harper name strong. Meanwhile, I had become something else entirely. The son who left. The son who chased a career out west. The son who stopped calling. None of it was true. But when enough people repeat something long enough, it starts to sound like the truth. Rachel noticed the shift in me before I ever said a word about it. We were washing dishes one night when she spoke up. "You've been quiet lately." "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." She dried her hands with a towel and leaned against the counter. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Then I told her. About Lucas. About the Thanksgiving toast. About the story being told back in Ashford. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "You could fix that with one phone call." I knew exactly what she meant. One call to my parents. One conversation. One truth. I could, I admitted. "So why don't you?" I stared at the sink for a moment. "Because it would turn into a fight." And then the house becomes part of the fight. Rachel crossed her arms. "You're protecting them." "Yeah." "From the truth. From losing the house." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked over to the living room window and looked out at the streetlights. Then she said something quietly. "Just make sure you're not protecting the wrong people." Another year passed. By then, the mortgage balance had dropped below $40,000. I remember the exact night I saw that number. It was late. Rachel had already gone to bed. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the credit union page. The number looked almost unreal. For years earlier, the balance had been over $130,000. Now it was barely a third of that. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to relief. The end was finally in sight. 2 months later, Aunt Carol called again. Her voice sounded tight. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." I sat up straighter. "What happened?" There was a long pause. "Your father said something at church last weekend." I braced myself. "What did he say?" Carol hesitated before answering. "He said he raised one son who understands loyalty, and another who walked away from it." The words landed hard. I rubbed my forehead. Did he actually say my name? No. But everyone knew who he meant. I didn't call my parents. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. Instead, I kept doing what I had been doing for 4 years. Working. Saving. Paying the mortgage. Because the house was almost paid off now. And once it was finished, I could finally walk away from the whole situation with a clear conscience. Or at least that's what I thought. The final payment happened on a Wednesday in early September. I remember the moment clearly. I was at my desk at work when a notification popped up on my phone. Mortgage balance, $0. For a few seconds I just stared at the screen. 4 years. 48 payments. Over $103,000. Gone. The house on Cedar Lane now belonged completely to my parents. Free and clear. No bank. No debt. No foreclosure. Just a paid-off home sitting quietly in a small town in Maine. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It was done. Finally. That night Rachel and I celebrated with takeout noodles on the couch. Nothing fancy. But it felt like the end of something huge. "So what happens now?" she asked. I shrugged. Now I just live my life. No dramatic reveal? Nope. No family confrontation? Definitely not. Rachel studied me for a moment. You're really going to let your brother keep the credit? I thought about it. Then I nodded. The house is safe. That's enough. She didn't argue. But the look on her face said she wasn't convinced. 2 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. I was scrolling through social media on a Sunday morning when a post from Lucas appeared on my feed. A big announcement. Bright photo. Dozens of comments already piling underneath it. The caption read, "Planning Mom and Dad's 35th anniversary party next month. Family celebration on Cedar Lane. Going to be a special night." Over 100 likes. Neighbors. Old classmates. Family members tagging each other. Uncle Steve promising barbecue. Aunt Carol commenting with a heart emoji. But one thing stood out immediately. There was no message for me. No call. No invitation. Nothing. I stared at the post for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Lucas. He answered on the third ring. "Well, look who it is," he said. "Hey," I replied. "I saw your post." "What post?" "The anniversary party." "Oh yeah," he said casually. "That." I took a breath. "When should I book my flight?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Lucas said something that made my grip tighten on the phone. "I didn't think you'd want to come." I frowned. Why wouldn't I? It's a family thing. The words hung there. I waited. Then I asked quietly, "Am I not family?" Lucas exhaled slowly. "Dad doesn't want any drama." I felt something deep in my chest tighten. Did Dad say that? Another pause. Longer this time. Then Lucas replied carefully, "I'm just trying to make the night smooth for everyone." I stared at the wall. For 4 years I had been paying the mortgage on the house where that party was going to happen. 4 years. And my own brother was deciding whether I was welcome there. Finally I said, "I'll be there." Lucas didn't respond. I hung up. Rachel was standing in the doorway. She had heard enough to understand. "You're going, aren't you?" she asked. "Yeah." "What are you bringing them?" I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then I said the only answer that made sense. "The truth." Rachel nodded slowly. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. For 4 years I had been protecting a lie. Now it was time to carry the truth back to Cedar Lane. Inside a single box. The next morning I called Ashford Community Credit Union. The same number I had called 4 years earlier. Mark Dalton answered on the second ring. "Dalton speaking." "Mark, it's Daniel Harper." There was a brief pause before recognition clicked in his voice. "Well, if it isn't the man who quietly paid off a mortgage without telling a soul." I smiled faintly. "Yeah. That's me." "Congratulations, by the way," he said. "That was one of the cleanest payoffs I've seen in years." "Thanks." I hesitated for a second. "That's actually why I'm calling." Mark waited. "I need the full payment history," I said. "All of it." "You mean the statements?" "Yes." "Every month?" "Every month." There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Mark asked carefully, "You planning to show someone?" "Yeah." Another pause. "Well," he said slowly, "if I print the full record, it's going to show everything." "My name?" "Yes." "My account?" "Yes." "The dates of every payment?" "Yes." "That's exactly what I need." Mark exhaled softly. "All right," he said. "Give me a couple of days. I'll notarize everything so there's no question about it." "Thank you." Before hanging up, he added one more thing. "Daniel?" Yeah. In 25 years working at this bank, I've seen people lose homes for a lot less than what you did to save that one. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure whether what I had done counted as strength, or something else entirely. The package arrived 3 days later. A thick manila envelope from Ashford Community Credit Union. I sat at my kitchen table in Phoenix staring at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were 60 pages of records. Every single payment. 48 months. $2,150 each time. My name printed next to every transaction. Behind those pages was the final document. The mortgage satisfaction certificate. Official. Stamped. Signed. Proof that the house on Cedar Lane had been paid in full. And proof of who had paid it. I ran my fingers over the raised seal on the paper. For years of quiet sacrifice summarized in a few lines of ink. Then I did one more thing. I wrote a letter. Just 1 page. Handwritten. Not dramatic. Not angry. But honest. It took me 3 attempts before I finished it. The first time I stopped halfway through. The second time my handwriting started shaking. The third time I got through the entire page without pausing. When I finished, I folded the paper carefully and slid it into a plain white envelope. On the front I wrote, Mom and Dad. Nothing else. The next step was the box. Rachel came with me to the craft store. We stood in the aisle looking at different options. Gift bags. Decorative boxes. Wrapping paper. Eventually I picked a medium-sized black box. Plain. Sturdy. Rachel raised an eyebrow. No gold paper? I shook my head. No. Why not? I thought about it for a second. Because this isn't a celebration. She nodded. That made sense. We placed the documents and the letter inside. Then I closed the lid. Rachel watched me tape the box shut. You sure about this? She asked. I'm not going there to fight. But you are going there to tell the truth. Yeah. That might feel like the same thing to them. I didn't respond. Because she was probably right. The morning of my flight arrived faster than I expected. Rachel drove me to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport just after sunrise. The black box sat on my lap the entire ride. Neither of us talked much. At the drop-off lane she turned off the engine and looked at me. Whatever happens, she said, you already did the right thing. I nodded. For years of the right thing. It didn't feel like it yet. But maybe it would someday. I stepped out of the car and grabbed my bag. Rachel leaned across the center console and hugged me quickly. Then she said something I didn't expect. Don't let them make you feel small again. I promised I wouldn't. But promises are easy in airport parking lots. Harder inside living rooms filled with people who already believe a different version of the story. The flight from Phoenix to Boston took nearly 5 hours. From there I rented a small sedan and started the drive north into Maine. The farther I drove, the more familiar the landscape became. Pine trees. 2-lane highways. Small towns with diners and gas stations that hadn't changed in decades. By the time I reached Ashford, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. The town looked exactly the same. The same grocery store. The same faded movie theater sign. The same church steeple rising above the trees. I hadn't been back in 6 years. But nothing had moved. Cedar Lane appeared just after the old baseball field. My heart started beating faster as I turned onto the street. Halfway down the block, I saw the house. Same white siding. Same wooden porch. Same maple tree in the yard. But tonight it looked different. Balloons were tied to the mailbox. A banner stretched across the porch railing. Happy 35th anniversary Richard and Elaine. Cars lined both sides of the street. At least 20 of them. I pulled my rental car to the curb and turned off the engine. Music drifted from inside the house. Laughter. Voices layered over one another. The sound of a big gathering already in full swing. I looked at the black box sitting on the passenger seat. One corner of the lid had shifted slightly during the drive. I straightened it with my thumb. For a moment I considered turning the key and driving away. No confrontation. No awkward conversations. Just a quiet exit from a town that had already decided who I was. But then I thought about the house. The mortgage. 4 years of payments. And the story everyone believed. Slowly I picked up the box and stepped out of the car. The walk to the front door felt longer than it should have. The porch light glowed warm against the evening sky. Inside, I could see people moving through the living room. Old neighbors. Relatives. Faces I hadn't seen in years. The screen door creaked when I opened it. The sound carried into the house like a signal. A few heads turned immediately. Then a few more. Conversations slowed. Someone near the kitchen stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down was the first person to recognize me. Her eyes widened. "Daniel?" The room grew quieter. "Well, I'll be," she said louder. "Look who's here." Now everyone was staring. Some looked surprised. Some looked curious. A few looked uncomfortable. I scanned the room slowly. Uncle Steve stood near the food table holding a paper plate. 2 of Lucas's old high school friends were leaning against the wall. And near the center of the room, I saw my brother. Lucas stood beside the dining table with a drink in his hand. When his eyes landed on me, the smile on his face froze for half a second. Then he recovered. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone who had rehearsed how to react if this moment ever happened. He set his drink down and walked toward me. When he got close, he leaned in slightly. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "I came for Mom and Dad's anniversary. I told you this wasn't a good idea." "I didn't ask you." Lucas glanced down at the box in my hands. "What's that?" "A gift." He smirked slightly. "You should leave before Dad sees you." But it was already too late. Across the room, my father had just turned around. And my mother was already staring straight at me. The entire house went silent. And for the first time in 6 years, I was standing in the middle of Cedar Lane again, holding the truth in a black box. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the cousins standing near the kitchen. Not the neighbors gathered around the dessert table. Not even the music playing softly from the speaker in the corner. It was like the entire house had paused to see what would happen next. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Daniel." She glanced toward Lucas, then back at me. "We didn't invite you." The sentence hung in the air. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the room heard it clearly. Every conversation had already died. 60 people watching. Waiting. I nodded slowly. "I know." The words came out calmer than I expected. "I came anyway." My father pushed his chair back and stood up. Richard Harper was a tall man even in his 60s, broad shoulders from decades of lifting engines and turning wrenches. Tonight he wore a pressed button-down shirt like he always did for family gatherings. But the look on his face wasn't welcoming. It was the same look he used to have when someone brought a broken car into his shop after ignoring the warning signs for too long. Annoyed. Impatient. Disappointed. He stepped around the table and stopped a few feet away from me. "You should have stayed in Arizona," he said. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "I'm here for your anniversary," I replied. He glanced down at the box in my hands. Then back at my face. "And what exactly is that supposed to fix?" "It's just a gift." Dad let out a short laugh. But there was no humor in it. "You disappear for years," he said loudly, "and now you think showing up with a present makes everything all right?" Behind him, Lucas stood with his arms folded. Watching. Not saying a word. But the faint smile on his face said enough. I stepped forward and placed the black box on the dining table, right between the anniversary cake and a vase of white flowers. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came because you're my parents." My mother looked like she wanted to say something. Her hands were gripping the edge of her chair. But before she could speak, my father reached out and shoved the box. Not gently. Not even carefully. Just a flat push with his palm. The box slid across the table, hit the edge, and fell to the floor. The sound it made was louder than it should have been. Like something fragile hitting concrete. The room gasped. Not loudly. But 60 people inhaling at the same time has a sound to it. My father pointed toward the door. "We don't want anything from the son who walked away from this family." His voice carried through the room. Every word clear. Every sentence meant to be heard. "Lucas stayed," he continued. "Lucas took care of this house." He gestured toward my brother. "Lucas made sure we didn't lose everything." Lucas didn't speak. He just stood there with that same controlled expression. Like someone enjoying a victory they had already secured. I looked around the room. Mrs. Patterson was staring down at her hands. Uncle Steve had set his fork down on his plate. 2 of Lucas's friends were shifting awkwardly near the wall. No one said anything. No one stepped forward. And for a moment I understood something clearly. Every person in this room believed the same story. Lucas had saved the house. Lucas had stayed loyal. Lucas was the good son. And I was the one who left. I bent down and picked up the box. The lid had come loose slightly when it hit the floor. I pressed it back into place. Smoothed the corner with my thumb. The way you might straighten something fragile before putting it away. Then I stood up again. I looked at my father. Then my mother. Then Lucas. "I didn't come here to beg," I said quietly. "I came to give you something I spent 4 years working for." Nobody moved. "But I'm not going to stand here and be humiliated for loving you." The words surprised even me. But once they were out, they felt right. I picked up the box. Turned. And started walking toward the front door. Behind me, the room remained silent. The slideshow playing in the corner continued flipping through old family photos. Music kept drifting from the speaker. Life moving forward like nothing had happened. Except everyone knew something had. I was halfway to the door when a hand touched my arm. A moment. I turned. Aunt Carol stood there. She hadn't moved from her spot near the hallway the entire time. Her eyes moved from my face to the black box in my hands. Then back again. "I wondered when you'd finally come back," she said quietly. I didn't respond. She studied the box for a moment. "What's inside?" "The truth." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That sounds heavy." "It is." She looked back toward the dining table where my parents were still standing. Lucas had already started speaking quietly to a few guests. Trying to restart the party. Trying to smooth things over. Carol turned back to me. "Leave it with me." I hesitated. "What?" "The box," she said. "Give it to me." I looked down at it. 4 years of sacrifice. 4 years of silence. 4 years of truth sitting inside something small enough to carry under one arm. "I was going to give it to them," I said. Carol nodded toward the table. "You tried." She wasn't wrong. "But now they won't open it," she added. "And that story your brother told everyone will keep standing." I looked past her at my father. He wasn't even looking in my direction anymore. Lucas had already pulled him into another conversation. The night was moving on. Just like I had never been there. Carol extended her hand. Let me handle it. I studied her face. Aunt Carol wasn't dramatic. She wasn't someone who chased confrontation. But there was something steady in her eyes now. Something that told me she had been watching this lie unfold for years. And she was done staying quiet. Slowly, I handed her the box. She took it carefully. Like it actually weighed more than cardboard and paper. Drive safe, Daniel, she said. I nodded once. Then I stepped out the front door. The night air outside felt colder than it had earlier. I walked down the porch steps. Across the yard. Back toward the rental car parked at the curb. Behind me the house still glowed with warm lights. Music. Laughter starting again. Like a storm had passed and the party had decided to keep going. I opened the car door and sat down behind the wheel. For a few seconds I just stared at the steering wheel. For years. For years of payments. And the entire story had just been reduced to a single moment where my father pushed a box off a table. I started the engine. Pulled away from the curb. And drove toward the end of Cedar Lane. But what I didn't know yet was that inside that house, Aunt Carol had already placed the black box back on the dining table. And she was about to open it in front of everyone. Whether my brother liked it or not. I didn't see what happened next. Not with my own eyes. By the time the truth finally came out inside that living room, I was already halfway down Route 17 heading toward the highway. But Aunt Carol told me everything later. And Carol has never been the kind of person who exaggerates a story. If anything, she tells things exactly the way they happened. Sometimes more honestly than people want to hear. According to her, the party tried to recover after I left. Lucas clapped his hands together and smiled at the guests. All right, everyone, he said. Let's not let this ruin Mom and Dad's night. Someone awkwardly laughed. A couple of people picked up their forks again. The music kept playing in the background. But the mood in the room had changed. Everyone had seen the same thing. A son walking into his parents' house with a gift. And walking back out with it 5 minutes later. You can't pretend that didn't happen. Even if you try. Carol was still standing near the front door. The black box in her hands. She told me later it felt heavier than she expected. Not physically. Emotionally. Like she was holding 4 years of something that should have been said a long time ago. Lucas was moving quickly through the room. Talking. Laughing. Trying to patch the atmosphere back together. Cake's ready, he announced. Let's cut the cake. But Carol didn't move. Instead, she walked slowly toward the dining table. The same table where my father had shoved the box onto the floor just minutes earlier. She set the box down carefully. Then she spoke. Before anyone cuts that cake, she said clearly, there's something you all should see. The room fell silent again. My father looked up sharply. Carol, he said, irritation creeping into his voice, this isn't the time. Carol didn't look at him. Actually, she said calmly, this is exactly the time. Lucas stepped forward quickly. Aunt Carol, he said quietly, let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be. Carol finally looked at him. Her expression was calm. But there was steel in her voice. Bigger than it needs to be? She rested her hand on the box. This box has been 4 years in the making. The room stilled. Lucas's face shifted slightly. Just for a second. The first crack. Carol opened the lid. Inside was the manila envelope from Ashford Community Credit Union. She lifted it slowly so everyone could see the logo printed in the corner. Then she removed the first document. The mortgage satisfaction certificate. She unfolded it carefully. Adjusted her reading glasses. And began reading. Mortgage satisfaction notice for the property located at 214 Cedar Lane, Ashford, Maine. People leaned forward slightly. The mortgage balance has been paid in full as of September 3rd. A murmur rippled through the room. Lucas crossed his arms. Carol continued. This document certifies that the total balance of the mortgage has been fully satisfied. She paused. Then read the final line. Paid in full by Daniel Harper. The room went completely still. Not quiet. Still. Like the air itself had stopped moving. Someone near the kitchen whispered. What? Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth with both hands. Uncle Steve leaned back slowly in his chair. My father didn't move. He just stared at the paper in Carol's hands. Carol reached back into the envelope, pulled out the stack of statements, and held them up. 48 payments, she said. $2,150 each. She flipped through the pages slowly. Every single one from the same account. She lowered the papers. Daniel's. Another murmur rolled through the room. This one louder. More shocked. People began looking at Lucas. The shift was immediate. 10 minutes earlier he had been the hero of the evening. Now the entire room was watching him. Waiting. Lucas swallowed. That's not. Carol cut him off. The bank confirmed everything. She tapped the stack of papers. Every payment. Every month. For years. The silence in the room turned heavy. Mrs. Patterson whispered. Oh my God. My mother sank slowly back into her chair. Her hands shaking. My father still hadn't moved. But Carol said his knuckles had gone white where he gripped the edge of the table. Lucas finally spoke. I helped, he said quickly. His voice sounded tighter now. I handled the finances. I organized things. You told everyone you paid the mortgage, Carol said flatly. Lucas opened his mouth. Closed it again. Then tried a different approach. I was managing everything, he insisted. I kept things together while Daniel disappeared. Carol held up one of the statements. This one's from last November, she said. $2,150. She flipped to another. And this one's from March. Another. And this one's from June. She looked directly at him. Do you want to point out where your money is on any of these pages? Lucas didn't answer. Because there was nowhere to point. The shift in the room became visible. Guests who had been smiling at Lucas earlier now looked uncomfortable. A few people avoided eye contact entirely. Uncle Steve shook his head slowly. Mrs. Patterson whispered something to the woman next to her. Lucas took a step backward. Then another. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Like someone who had just realized the floor beneath him might not be solid anymore. My father finally spoke. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. You told me you were paying the mortgage. Lucas looked at him. I was helping. You said you were paying it. You said it at church. My father's voice didn't rise. But something inside it had changed. Carol said it sounded like metal bending under pressure. You let me thank you in front of everyone. Lucas didn't respond. Because there was no response that could fix what had just been exposed. Carol reached into the box one last time. She pulled out the white envelope. The one with the simple handwriting on the front. Mom and Dad. She held it up. There's one more thing. My father didn't reach for it. His hands were shaking too much. My mother was already crying. Quiet tears sliding down her face. Carol opened the envelope. Unfolded the letter. And began to read. Slowly. Carefully. Mom and Dad, she read. I know you probably think I left because I stopped caring about this family. The room stayed silent. But the truth is I left because I didn't know how to stay and still be seen. Carol paused briefly, then continued. When I heard the house might be lost, I couldn't let that happen. More silence. So I paid the mortgage. Not because I expected anything back, but because this house is part of who we are. Her voice softened slightly. I love you both. I always have. Even when you thought I didn't. Carol folded the letter slowly, set it down on the table, and looked around the room. No one said anything, because everyone now understood exactly what had happened. The son everyone believed had abandoned the family had actually been the one holding it together. And the son everyone praised had let them believe a lie for 4 years. Carol told me later the party never recovered after that. People began quietly collecting their coats. The cake remained untouched on the table. Neighbors slipped out the front door one by one. Nobody wanted to be there anymore. Not after realizing the truth had been sitting in a box on that table the entire night. And the person who deserved to hear it most had already walked away. By the time the truth finished unraveling inside my parents' living room, I was already miles away from Ashford. The highway stretched dark and quiet in front of me. Pine trees lined both sides of the road, their shadows sliding across the windshield as my headlights cut through the night. For the first hour, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. My mind kept replaying the same moment over and over. The sound of the box hitting the floor. My father's voice telling me I should have stayed in Arizona. Lucas standing there with that confident smile. And the room full of people who believed the same story. By the time I reached the interstate, the town lights of Ashford had disappeared completely behind me. Just darkness and asphalt. I didn't know it yet, but back on Cedar Lane the story was already collapsing. Carol told me later that after she finished reading the letter, nobody in the room spoke for nearly 30 seconds. Not a whisper. Not a cough. Just 60 people sitting in silence. My father was the first to move. He sat down slowly in his chair, like his legs had suddenly lost strength. Then he reached for the stack of bank statements. Page after page. He flipped through them carefully. Every payment. Every month. Daniel Harper. Daniel Harper. Daniel Harper. Carol said he ran his finger down the columns like he was trying to convince himself the numbers would change if he looked long enough. They didn't. Across the table, my mother had her hands pressed against her face. She wasn't crying loudly. Just quiet, steady tears. The kind that come when something inside you finally breaks open. Lucas had already stepped back toward the hallway. No one followed him. No one defended him. The silence around him said more than any argument could. Within 10 minutes the first guests began leaving. Uncle Steve grabbed his jacket and muttered something about an early morning. Mrs. Patterson hugged my mother briefly before slipping out the door. The neighbors followed. Then the cousins. One by one the house emptied. By the time the last car pulled away from Cedar Lane, only 4 people remained inside. My mother. My father. Aunt Carol. And the box sitting on the table. Carol told me the next part quietly when we spoke days later. After everyone left, my father read every single statement. All 48 of them. He didn't rush. He didn't skip pages. He read each one like it was a confession written in numbers. When he finished, he put the stack down and stared at the letter again. Then he said something Carol would never forget. I pushed it off the table. My mother looked at him. The box, he continued quietly. I pushed my own son's heart onto the floor. Carol said it was the first time in her entire life she had seen my father cry. Not wipe his eyes. Not turn away. Actually cry. The kind of crying that comes from realizing you've misunderstood something important for far too long. I didn't know any of that when I arrived back in Boston that night. My flight to Phoenix left early the next morning. So I checked into a small airport hotel, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. For a long time I didn't move. For years. For years of effort had ended in a 10-minute conversation and a box hitting the floor. Part of me wondered if Rachel had been right. Maybe I should have told the truth years ago. Maybe none of this would have happened. Or maybe it would have happened anyway. Some stories take time to break open. The flight back to Phoenix was quiet. I slept most of the way. When I landed, Rachel was waiting outside the terminal. She didn't ask how the night went. She just hugged me. Then she took my bag and said, "Let's go home." The drive back to the apartment was silent. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind where someone understands that words would only make things heavier. That night I slept for nearly 10 hours straight. The longest sleep I'd had in months. The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, and stepped out onto the small balcony outside my apartment. The desert sky was just starting to lighten. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't full of reminders about mortgage payments. The house on Cedar Lane was free. No debt. No bank. Just a house. I took a sip of coffee and watched the sun climb slowly above the rooftops. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Dad. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again. This time I answered. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then I heard his voice. It sounded older than I remembered. Daniel. Just hearing him say my name felt strange. I'm sorry. 3 words. That was it. No long explanation. No excuses. Just 3 words I had waited most of my life to hear. I leaned against the balcony railing. The morning air felt cool against my face. You didn't even open the box, I said quietly. He inhaled slowly. I know. Silence stretched between us. Then he spoke again. We're driving to Phoenix. What? Your mom and I. That's a 30-hour drive. We already started. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second. Then brought it back. You're serious? We left an hour ago. I didn't know what to say. So I just stood there on my balcony watching the sun climb higher. Finally I asked. Why? My father's voice cracked slightly. Because I need to apologize to you face to face. They arrived 2 days later. A dusty pickup truck pulled into the parking lot outside my apartment building. When my parents stepped out, they looked exhausted. Like 2 people who had spent an entire road trip thinking about the same mistake. My mother hugged me first. She cried the entire time. My father stood a few feet away, waiting. When she stepped back, he finally spoke. I should have asked you the truth, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. We stood there quietly for a moment. Then I stepped aside. You can come in. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the start of something. That was 3 months ago. Since then, my father has called every Sunday evening. 7 o'clock. Without fail. My mother sends handwritten cards every few weeks. Small notes about the weather. About the maple tree in the yard. About things she remembers from when Lucas and I were kids. And Lucas? He hasn't called. He hasn't texted. He hasn't tried to explain anything. But I stopped chasing explanations a long time ago. Some people rewrite stories. Others simply stop telling them. Looking back now, I still wonder about something. Should I have told the truth sooner? If I had called my parents the day I started paying the mortgage and said, "It's me," would things have turned out differently? Or would Lucas have found another way to twist the story? I honestly don't know. But I do know this. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the people who say the least are the ones carrying the most weight. If this story meant something to you, make sure you subscribe to Women Reddit Stories so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have revealed the truth from the beginning? Or kept the secret the way I did? Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next story.